Diphenhydramine DPH low dosage experiment. So what's going on? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report was sent in by Deven. The drugs used: diphenhydramine cannabis, at a dose of 150 milligrams, 175 milligrams, and 250 milligrams of diphenhydramine on separate occasions. The route of administration: orally. Gender: male. Weight: 190 pounds. Age: 17. Prior experience: LSD, shrooms, DMT, and cannabis. And the setting: at school and at home. So today we have a report on diphenhydramine, looking at what some of the lower recreational doses offer. We normally will cover reports with people taking like 20 pills or like 300 plus at least, but doses between 50 milligrams and 300 milligrams can offer a somewhat different experience. Some claim this to be an actual recreational sweet spot, as we'll see there are some pros for Deven, but that doesn't mean it won't be without the cons either this low. There still are some very heavy physical and psychological difficulties that are reported throughout this. I wouldn't say this is the most controlled experience either, as the second dose is more impulsive, and he takes it while still coming down off of the first dose, but Deven does a really good job at detailing his experience out and shows well what you may find at doses like these. Even with these being low doses, this still is very delirium-like, and I'm sure many of you are going to enjoy this report. So, without further ado, let's dive right into this. This report spans across a week from my discovery of DPH to the day after my highest dosage. I want it to be detailed as possible and attempt to show the effects of low-dose diphenhydramine and give my analysis on it. I'm a 17-year-old male, weigh around 190 pounds, and have had only just started experimenting with diphenhydramine. In the past couple of years, I've done a fair amount of LSD, tried shrooms once, and smoked DMT, but not enough to break through. I'm also an avid marijuana smoker. Over Thanksgiving weekend, I endured a pretty harsh cold and put myself on a medicine schedule that consisted of DayQuil pills throughout the day and NyQuil pill at night. During those nights, I noticed that the NyQuil pills had an extreme effect of drowsiness on me and quickly knocked me out cold. I didn't think much of it, but I decided to stop taking the NyQuil and just sticking to the daytime medicine. Monday, I stayed home from school and slept throughout most of the day, but still managed my medicine schedule. I was still very sick, so before the day was over, my mother told me that I could stay home another day. That night, I decided I would take a nighttime pill since I wouldn't be going to school and I could sleep throughout the night worry-free. To no surprises, I knocked out unconscious. Tuesday, 150 milligrams. I found myself researching on various drugs found in cold medicine and what would happen when taking high doses. Not necessarily because I was looking for a high, but I was simply curious. This is when I stumbled upon diphenhydramine on a few Reddit posts. The ones I read were of low doses of 200 to 400 milligrams of DPH and described a heavy body feeling. I didn't read further before heading to my medicine cabinet to see if we had any in the house, and I found a full bottle of purple sleep aid pills, 25 milligrams of pure DPH in each pill. I took 6 that night, totaling up to 150 milligrams. After taking the pills around 10 o'clock at night, I stayed up till about 1 a.m. watching TV in my living room. The only effects I could feel was mild cotton mouth and a very slight relaxed feeling, along with slow motor skills. I continued researching and came across Reddit posts describing much more eventful experiences on DPH. Deliriousness. Hallucinations of some overall scary and horrible things. I became nervous, hoping that I wouldn't see anything horrific. I felt regret for taking the pills and just sort of on edge. Eventually, I passed out on my couch. Really quickly before getting into the next part, I need to add that last year, I was diagnosed with restless leg syndrome. If I am sitting still, my leg will bounce or shake involuntarily and sometimes without me even knowing. Also, ever since starting high school, I believe I have developed some sort of anxiety, possibly social anxiety, that makes many things throughout my school day very difficult. But to my knowledge, I'm pretty good at hiding it. You'll see why I'm telling you this in the next part. Wednesday, 175 milligrams. I woke up late and a little bit confused. It wasn't my intention to sleep in my living room, but oh well. I didn't waste much time since I was running a bit late, so I showered and got dressed like normally. I usually get up 2 hours before school even starts. I still had a half hour to chill and smoke a few bowls before school. This is when I had the bright idea to waltz over to my bathroom and contemplate in front of my mirror whether or not I should take more of the DPH pills. After a few minutes, I decided that I was going to take 175 milligrams, one more pill than the night before. By doing this, I was thinking that the sedative/sleepy effects would relieve a bit of my school anxiety. Looking back, I was high as fuck and popped 7 sleeping pills right before school while 150 milligrams was still in my system. Responsibly, I ate a bowl of cereal, brushed my teeth, and began walking a few blocks down the street to my buddy Aaron's house. While walking, I felt a slight pain in the top left of my stomach and my heart started racing. This was very frightening to me because I had read about people having seizures on DPH, but never on such low doses. I tried to keep my cool as I walked, but my path would sway side to side like I was drunk, and it sort of felt like it. Along the way, I met up with my other friend Deven, who I walked beside but didn't say a word to. Both of us rode with Aaron, so when we got to his house, we all loaded up into the car and headed to school. On the way there, I was barely in tune with what Aaron and Deven were talking about. They would say something to me, and despite whether I heard them or not, I would just agree and couldn't express much emotion, for whatever reason. When I got to my first period history class, I was met with a quiz that I had been told about the previous week, but had forgot. I became very nervous, but tried my best on the quiz, which took me way too long given that it was purely multiple choice, and the questions were undeniably easy. All the while, my leg was bouncing up and down, but I didn't think much of it yet since my leg normally does that. When I finished the quiz, I felt an overwhelming wave of tiredness, and I decided to plop my head down on the desk and get a few minutes of sleep. Before I knew it, my teacher was tapping my desk to wake me up. I really began to feel things at this point, and my vision was affected very slightly. The most intense feeling was my restless leg was shaking vigorously under my desk, so bad that I couldn't stop even if I thought really hard about it. After a while, it was easy to ignore, but this cannot be said about the awful dry mouth and throat that I was experiencing. I was already suffering a sore throat, and this made me feel like I was choking on cotton balls. Excusing myself to get a drink of water was out of the question, since I was at this point unsure of just how affected my movement was. Instead, I just sat at my desk at the front of the room as the teacher began the lesson. She was standing in front of the smartboard, reading off a PowerPoint. As I stared at the words on the screen, I noticed that when I looked away from the words, they would still appear in my vision before fading slowly out of view. I was amused by this and played around for it for most of the class, as the tiredness effect was becoming more potent. I had typical drowsiness symptoms, heavy eyes, and fatigue. A feeling of paranoia was brewing inside of me as the end of class approached, knowing that I was going to have to stand up and walk soon. As students gathered around the door, I remained in my desk right up until the bell rang, and, like ripping off a band-aid, I shot up and scurried out of the classroom. At first, walking down the hall was easy, but I felt sluggish, awkward, and disoriented, swaying slightly side to side, and nearly stumbling down the stairs to my homeroom. My body was starting to feel a bit heavier, but I was able to fight past it and make my way to my desk in homeroom. Friends of mine entered the room as well and sat around me, conversing among each other. All of the sounds around me seemed louder and more defined, and I was able to hear everything a lot clearer. The tiredness had not yet subsided, so I put my head down and attempted to fall asleep, at this point feeling like I had made a mistake. I focused on the noises and voices around me, but I'm unable to remember what I heard. This is when I began to relax a little bit. I knew that I had an hour and a half to come down and sleep, so I had no intentions of lifting my head from the comfort of my desktop. In my attempt to fall asleep, I began to have closed-eye hallucinations. I was very much awake and just playing out a dream in my head. However, It felt so unbelievably real. Like, I was really there, but then I would snap back into it and realize I was actually in my homeroom class. This was a lot of fun and definitely the most enjoyable part of the entire experience that day. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful and boring. I woke up from my nap in homeroom, still drowsy as hell, but noticeably on the come down. I didn't feel like eating during lunch and decided against telling my close friends that I had just taken a bunch of sleeping pills before school. Throughout the course of the day, my motor skills found their way back to me, but I still felt like passing out wherever I stood. When I got home, I felt nearly back to normal, deciding that I was able enough to speak to my parents. While conversing with my mom, she asked me why I slept in the living room, and I told her that I was watching a movie. Then she mentioned that she came into the living room around 3 a.m. and saw me sitting in the armchair, staring at the TV with the lights on. She said she asked what I was doing awake, but I just looked up at her and didn't respond, so she just left me. I shook this off and just told her I was very tired, and that's why I didn't respond to her, but I have zero recollection of this happening at all. I became even more interested in DPH and its effects upon hearing this, so I began researching more on the drug and gaining way more information on diphenhydramine, reading into various trip reports of people taking as much as 1,500 milligrams. I then decided that I would try again, but would wait until the weekend and trip at home, at night. Saturday, 250 milligrams. Friday night, I decided against doing it, simply because I backed out in fear. Reading up on people's trip reports fueled me with a little bit of anxiety, so come Saturday night, I knew that I would have to do it then or wait until next weekend, since there was no way I would go to school on DPH again. I psyched myself up enough and went along with it, waiting for my parents to go to bed, and when they did, at around 10:30, I poured out 10 25 DPH pills and took them to my bathroom, where I downed them with a glass of Kool-Aid. There was no going back now. I sat at my computer desk and began watching Big Mouth on Netflix while waiting for the effects. Of course I began feeling anxious, since I knew that I was the only person awake in my house. So, it was eerie and lonely. Restless leg began to increase in severity, along with my paranoia. I kept looking over my shoulder and pausing Netflix to listen into the silence. About 20 minutes later, I turned off Netflix and went over to YouTube. I put my Pink Floyd playlist on and relaxed a bit. It seems a common trend with DPH is the music euphoria, and let me tell you, it's real. The music sounded heavenly, so crisp and clear. It's overall easier to feel the music when on DPH. After listening for a little while, I may have begun having auditory hallucinations, believing that I was hearing things through the music. I chose not to pause the music when hearing things, so I wouldn't get caught up in it, as I just wanted to enjoy the music. When I started looking over my shoulder again, a couple times I focused in on 2 black dots on my wall, across the room. As I stared at the dots, they appeared to move around slowly in all directions, but never really got anywhere. When I stared at the dot harder, as several minutes of music went by in my ears, the black dot began to form clusters of other black dots that moved around the area of the wall. Initially, I was freaked out by this, but was quickly able to confirm that it was a hallucination. Nonetheless, I could not stop looking over my shoulder and staring at it continuously. I became very hyperactive and compulsive, and the paranoia continued to linger. Another half hour or so passed, and I was still listening to music. The music only sounded better as the night went on, but here is where I started to get serious visuals. As I stared into my laptop, a faint outline of a head, which I believed to be my own, appeared over my screen. I could see through it, as there was no face, only the silhouette of a head with shoulder-length hair and a headset on. I ignored this for a little while, but when I turned my music off and gazed around my room, I saw that head outline was now on my wall and much more noticeable. I was unable to keep my brain from straying into negative and scary thoughts, so my paranoia brewed as I sat in silence. I knew that I was having hallucinations, so it made me not want to turn the lights off, in fear of seeing even more sinister things in the darkness. I decided that it was best to put Big Mouth back on and try to relax and keep my head on. I remember trying to type Netflix into the search bar and having a very difficult time doing so. My hands felt so heavy, like they were magnetically attracted to my desk. I noticed then that I had not yet gotten up from my chair to test the body effects. I had a few bottles of water at my desk to mend my cotton mouth, and since one of the symptoms of DPH is urinary retention, I had not had the urge to take a piss all night. At this point, it was around midnight, if I remember correctly, and I stood up from my desk to test my movement. Immediately, I was dragged back down to my chair, but with one more jump, I was on my feet, walking around my room. My legs were dead asleep, and I felt 100 pounds heavier. While standing in the middle of the room, I gazed at the walls and my curtains, and they now had a dark, grainy, and wooden-like pattern all over. I sat back down in my chair and watched about half an episode of Big Mouth before beginning to feel very drowsy, dozing off every now and again. There were no new visual effects, so I decided to try something that many people do while on DPH. I switched over to Pornhub because apparently masturbation feels godly on DPH, so I had to try it for myself. And good God, they were right. It felt like I was watching porn and beating my meat for the first time in forever. Truly amazing. Would recommend 10 out of 10. After I was done there, I noticed that the room was considerably darker than it was minutes before. So I looked over my shoulder and set my eyes upon the scariest fucking thing I've ever seen. A massive dark gray shadow figure as tall and wide as my entire wall stood over me, and I lost every bit of composure I had left. I rocketed from my chair, my legs almost failing beneath me and heart racing faster than ever. It was even darker in my hallway and living room, but I turned on every light I passed by, and there was no sign of the Shadow Man. I couldn't get myself to go back to my room, so I ended up waiting out my effects in my living room while watching Cops on TV and eventually passing out with the lights on once again. The next day. Most people typically have hangover-type symptoms following a night of tripping on DPH, but I don't believe I took enough for that to happen. Although, I had pretty bad daytime drowsiness all throughout the day, along with constant leg sleeping. Upon smoking weed and getting really high, I can see the Shadow Man's shape on the walls of dimly lit rooms. Other symptoms went away after a few days, but I continue to see that Shadow Man every now and then when smoking. Overall, I would only recommend DPH to those who know exactly what they're getting into. I had done a lot of research and felt that I was prepared for whatever I would see. I was wrong. I knew of every possible outcome, but was still caught completely off guard and scared shitless out of my mind. So, you should really only do this drug if you genuinely enjoy being frightened, or truly believe that you can handle the terrifying hallucinations and paranoia that comes along with it.